The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
The apostles returned from their mission. They gathered around Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a quiet place by ourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So they went away in the boat to a quiet place by themselves. But many saw them leaving and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and his heart was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
2 weeks ago, I went to a quiet place and made a retreat. And it was so wonderful just to have that precious time to read and reflect and pray and just be there with the Lord. And then last week, all the Capuchins in Wisconsin, and including some from Chicago, gathered in Appleton, and we spent 4 days studying together and reflecting on Pope Francis' encyclical on the joy of the gospel. It was such a good time to hear those wonderful words of the Holy Father and talk among ourselves and recreate together and just have a really beautiful time. Which reminded me that it's important that we take occasions for quiet, for relaxation, for recreation, for vacations, okay? You know, the very wise theologian St. Thomas Aquinas once said, "No one can live without some pleasure." That's why he said those who are deprived or deprive themselves of all innocent pleasures will often end up in sinful ones. Very wise. So we do need days off and little vacations and recreations and times to get away and so on. If I went around to talk to you, you tell me the same thing, how much you value those quiet moments or those times when you just take a break from all that preoccupies you. That's just something very human. That's why it's so good to hear today's gospel. Remember last Sunday it said Jesus sent the apostles out for the first time and empowered them to bring his message to the people in the towns around them. They got their first mission, okay? And they went out with great enthusiasm. And today in the gospel, they come back. And they went to talk to Jesus about how things went and so on. And he said, "Hey, let's go to a quiet place. We need a break. All these people are here, you know, they're pressing on us." And so they got into a boat and began to go across the lake. Jesus said, "No, a nice quiet place, we can gather together, and we'll have a nice time to talk to each other and renew." But the folks on the shore realized where they were going and began walking over there on foot. And they got there ahead of Jesus and the apostles. So when Jesus and the apostles approached in the boat, there's this big crowd waiting for them. Now, if that had been me, I'd spun that boat around and go out to the deep waters and be quiet out there. No, Jesus couldn't do that, okay? It says his heart was moved with compassion when he saw the crowd. And the Greek word is a very strong one. It literally means his intestines were stirred up. He had a gut reaction, okay? Moved with compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things, it says. He put his own needs and wants on hold in order to be there for them. Beautiful. So you see, there's a tension in our lives between the need to be there for our loved ones and for the people that we're serving, and time and quiet for ourselves. We may not always get that right, okay, perfectly balanced, but there's the tension. You know, in today's first reading, God tells Jeremiah the prophet he's displeased with the shepherds of Israel, the priests, because they were not feeding the people, they were feeding themselves. And God says, that's not right. Go out there and confront them. And in the process, Jeremiah foresees and foretells the coming of the truly good shepherd. The Messiah is coming to be the one who will really lift up the people. But meanwhile, the shepherds of Israel have to be confronted on their laziness, and they're wanting to be fed instead of feeding the people. So there's that tension, as I said. We need times of refreshment and quiet and recreation, but also when there's something or someone needs us, we need to be there and put our own wishes on hold. One of the great temptations is wanting to be fed instead of feeding others, okay? We had, when I was a novice, my very first year as a Capuchin, our novice master was a man named Father Elmer. And we go out in the decent weather out to the driveway where there was a basketball hoop. And we played basketball in the driveway. And Father Elmer was standing under the basket. He would say, feed me, and he'd make all the baskets, okay? Feed me. So, you know, one of the temptations of church workers is wanting to be fed instead of feeding the people, okay? That's always our tension. But we also need to have that sense of balance. We can't be busy and active, and otherwise we're going to burn out eventually. So that tension is there, and it's often difficult for us to get it just right, but we do the best we can. And so it's all right to say no sometimes. Father, can't think of his name, all right, a Franciscan friar, Richard Rohr, talks about the sacred no, the sacred no. Sometimes we say no to something or somebody for the sake of a greater yes. Otherwise, if we cannot say no, our yes will not mean very much. It'll just be kind of a need to please everybody, and we're going to get burned out, and that's not right. So the sacred no protects us from that and leaves us free then. When we do say yes, it'll be wholehearted and loving, and people will recognize that. And that's why sometimes I'm willing to put my own desires on hold and not take my break or whatever, because somebody needs me right now. And so I will do that. And you've done the same thing. If you're sometimes for your spouse or your children or your parent, a family member, a friend, this parish sometimes just needs you, and you say a wholehearted yes. And that's so beautiful. And it comes from your heart, and it's pleasing to God. So the sacred no sometimes becomes a sacred yes, life-giving, wholehearted, and builds up everybody, including ourselves. Now in that struggle to keep that balance, we can be encouraged by today's responsorial psalm, that beautiful Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, there's nothing I shall want. In verdant pastures he gives me repose. Beside restful waters he leads me and revives my soul. That is the word of the Lord.